Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to some of you. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Kenneth Chapman. I'm Vice President of Market Research here at D2L, and I'm really excited to talk about some of the ways that we can use gamification and game elements when we're designing our learning and we're putting it onto a learning platform. I've been fortunate enough to be in the education technology industry for 20 years. I was an undergraduate actually doing my first online course, and I found that it wasn't the experience that I was expecting. It wasn't the engaging sort of experience that I'd had in playing games and doing other things in software. So I wrote this big long letter to this company that was building the online course I was working through. I got hired by them, and I have been building learning management systems, VLEs, for the last 20 years. So what I want to do today is share some of the practices that we've seen that are really effective in layering in gamification and game elements into courses. With COVID striking, I've actually had the opportunity to stand up my own children's school using D2L's product. It's called Brightspace, and applying some of these techniques. So excited to share some of those with you today. Okay. So if you don't know who we are, D2L is a mission-driven company. We're here to be more than an educational or more than a tech company. We try to strive to be an education company. We want to solve harder problems, and we exist to try to transform the way the world learns. Now, this whole COVID thing happened, and the world of learning has kind of gotten transformed whether we wanted to or not. So let's go with it. This is the time to take advantage of really a once-in-a-generation opportunity to rethink learning and how it can be delivered online and how we can reach each and every learner. This is our chance to create experiences that are really great, engaging experiences. And to do so online and to figure that out right now will have a huge impact on this whole generation that are really learning how to learn online right now. And gamification and leveraging elements of games in learning is going to be crucial to delivering the kind of experience that our learners really expect and are looking for right now. So a little bit more about D2L and where I'm coming from. We might be new to you, but we've been around for about 20 years now. There are 20 million plus learners using Brightspace every single day. So Brightspace is the LMS that D2L provides. We would be in the same category as Moodle, as Blackboard, as Canvas, with the exception that a lot of the things I'm talking about today in terms of bringing in game mechanics are things we've really tried to hone well over the years. We're a little bit more sophisticated than Microsoft Teams or Google Classroom and some of those free options that you might be familiar with, where we bring in all aspects of the learning experience and that single place for learners to have access to their online environment, of which MS Teams or other tools might be part of that. We're headquartered out of Canada. We have offices globally and employees throughout the world, as well as customers throughout the world. We're really proud of the fact that we're natively in the cloud. So our platform, while it was being used by so many million learners during COVID, stayed online the entire time and used the infrastructure in the cloud to do that. We're also really proud of the fact that over 98% of the institutions that have chosen to partner with us are still with us today, some of them over several decades. We really love partnering with organizations to solve problems and generally improve the state of learning online worldwide. So the title of this webinar was about getting every learner engaged, whether they're young or old. And at D2L, we decided really early on that we wanted to build a learning platform that could serve anyone throughout their life, wherever and however they're learning. We've learned that, while there's very different ways that we work, that we act, that we think, there's still very much a common thread and a human element to what makes us engaged, what makes us motivated. And gaming really spans these borders. Ultimately, what gaming is about is making potentially tedious activities, basically work, into something that's engaging. something that everyone appreciates, and whether they're young or old, we all want to be engaged. We all want work to seem like it's fun. Ultimately, that's what we're talking about here. Games tap into our natural desire for competition, for achievement, and teachers, managers, and others that are designing learning can really take advantage of gamification to increase the level of participation they're getting from their learners, and ultimately to improve productivity and learner outcomes, which is what we're all here for. And we're used to this. I mean, gamification is often an essential feature in a lot of the apps and websites that we use on a day-to-day basis. They're designed to try to motivate us to use them and to meet personal challenges. Think of exercise or weight loss apps or learning a foreign language app. Those are all very familiar in the types of ways they've used game elements. And we'll see some of those as we go through this today. But ultimately, tracking your progress seems more fun and moving through something when it feels like a game. But I want to stress that this isn't something that's really easy to do at all. It's not simple to do well. There's no one-size-fits-all solution when we're designing a learning experience to have that gamified feel. We already know that not everybody is created equal in our classrooms, and the same thing is true when we're doing instruction and teaching and learning online. Equality is treating everybody equal, or equality is giving everybody the same thing, that one size fits all, and expecting each individual to be successful. They can't do it. You know, here when we look at bicycles, for some people the bicycle is too large, for others it's too small. For others, it's physically impossible for them to operate it. Giving everybody the same thing doesn't necessarily let each and every individual maximize their chance of success. Equity, on the other hand, is looking at and embracing each individual and their differences and providing them with what they need to be successful. But that's hard, and that requires really putting learners first and thinking about the learner and the design of a learning experience around what they need. So some of the ways that the learning principles that we've captured that show how you put learners first, and gaming really fits into this, some of these best practices are things like personalizing the learning experience. Doing things like just acknowledging who I am as a person, show my name on the screen, send me an automated nudge to keep me on track. You know, doing things like setting up rules to manage what activities I see next based on what I've done before. Putting learners first and learners at the center means going beyond basic accessibility. You know, beyond just making sure that I can read the learning environment with a screen reader if I'm visually impaired, but adopting the practices of universal design for learning. For those that aren't familiar with that, that's designing learning so that there are multiple ways of demonstrating a specific concept or idea. Ensuring that learning is designed so there's multiple ways for the learner to demonstrate that they've mastered a skill or ability or gained some knowledge. And finally, that there's multiple ways of designing engagement in ways to relate to and interact with the learning environment itself. So accessibility defined as broadly as possible is really critical to that learner-centered sort of mindset. We want to motivate our learners when we put them first. We want to minimize their anxiety, particularly when they're moving online and maybe haven't done that before. We want to give them dashboards to show their progress and the expectations of them. We want to make sure that we're keeping them encouraged and growing. And finally, we want to give learners some of the tools that they want to use. You know, we know that video is phenomenal in online learning to create presence and a sense of that human element that sometimes is lacking. And we have the opportunity to reward progress through awards and badges, and we'll talk a lot about that as we go through here. But again, I'll stress that these things are hard, and you need to scale yourself. It's not practical to be able to design a specific learning path or a learning experience for each and every one of your students. And that's why technology can be so transformational. We can use things like rules in our learning platform to scale up a really highly individualized experience using technology that's flexible. So we're not promoting a one-size-fits-all sort of mindset, Instead, we can download some of the expertise of educators and teachers. We can design a learning experience or a path towards mastering skills or learning outcomes. And we can release that to a large group of students that can all work through at their own pace, get their own personal recognition of completion and motivation elements. So there's a nice coming together of needs in online learning, where you want to reach each and every learner, but you want it to be practical enough to do it at scale and to not be so time consuming that you're spending forever to build online learning. But we can have all the great platforms, we can have all the best tech in the world, but we really, when we're designing a learning experience, we have to know our audience. We can gamify a course from top to bottom, but if the game mechanics aren't audience appropriate, they fall short of meeting the learner's needs. You know, on my little pixelated diagram on the right there, if everybody is coming to the kitchen and they're looking for a vegetarian option and you're only serving meat, guess what? Your customers aren't going to be happy. Your learners aren't going to be engaged and get what they want. So one of the ways we can make sure that we're designing gamified elements of our course is to make sure we're doing things that appeal to all of the different types of learners that are out there. And, you know, I don't mean to equate these with learning styles per se, but there are a few different types of gamers out there, of archetypes. There's the socializers. These are the people that, you know, they want to participate in discussions. They want to do group challenges. They want to share the awards and the badges that they've received with others. They want to create an avatar that projects who they are as a person and to share that with other people. Then we have achievers. These are people that simply want that trophy on their shelf. If there's a point to get, they want that point and they want more points. They want to level up and they want to know what's involved in getting to the next level. They love progress bars. They love to see their achievements. Then we've got explorers. Explorers want to meander around and figure out the whole map. They love narratives. They love a story that gets weaved that they can go and explore through, that they can fill with their own creativity, their own imagination, and bring that to bear in their learning activities. They like things that have different divergent paths and that encourage trying things in multiple different ways. They want to seek and discover all of the different options available to them. And then finally, we have the fighters or the killers. You know, these are the people that thrive on competition. They want to see the leaderboard and they want to see their name right at the top of that. They want interpersonal competitions. You know, even if it's who gets to help the most of their classmates, they want to know that they're on top of that. Anything that lets them impart their will on others is attractive to a fighter. So that's great about knowing our audience, but what makes for a really good game? Well, some of the elements that makes for great games are having a personalized, unique experience, recognizing the individual, reflecting their preferences, adapting the game and the activities in it based on their decisions and the actions that they've taken and the choices that they've made. Games often take place in different and attractive scenarios. Let people invent and bring those scenarios in from their own lives, or use some of your own creativity and imagination to transport them into somewhere new. Games typically have a feeling of progression or leveling up. You're gaining new skills. You're being acknowledged for the progress that you've made. And ultimately, they're based on overcoming a series of challenges and really getting to the top. Having clear objectives and instructions for what you're supposed to do and how you'll know if you've completed it. Recognition for when you've actually achieved and overcome a challenge, and the ability to share that with others. And when done right, what learners get out of gamified learning is a sense of creativity. They have a sense of contentment, of awe and wonder, of curiosity, of surprise. All things that we want our learners to experience, and all things that, frankly, when they're dealing with pretty linear, static content, they don't always get out of an online learning experience. So when the time and energy is put into understanding our learners and designing different ways to motivate them and to pique their interest, we really benefit their ability to succeed online. So we're going to see a few examples of some of these ideas in action. And as we think about these, I want you to think about, crawl, walk, and run. There are some things that are really simple to do when you're just crawling and thinking about incrementally improving an online experience. And there are some things that are quite sophisticated that is more like running. And we're going to walk through a series of examples that are maybe progressively a little bit more sophisticated. Okay, so right now I'm logged into Brightspace. I'm in the learning management system. And basically what we're going to do here is we're going to look through a lot of what would be normally static or one size fits all kind of content. And we're going to try to experience it and bring it to life with some of these ideas from gaming. So Brightspace is designed to be responsive and mobile first. So while I'm going to show everything today from a large desktop or laptop view, just know that all of the screens and the interfaces that I'm showing work just as well on a tablet or a phone. So responsive web here means it's going to work on any browser. So even when I'm creating the course, I could have chose to do all of these tasks on my phone today. Okay, so when I've logged into Brightspace, one of the first things I see here is it's personalized. Really, really simply, it uses my name. Hi there, Kenneth, this is Brightspace. Already there's a bit of a connection there emotionally. As I get announcements here, it's using that name right in place. And there's no magic there. They're simply just recognizing that the platform has this ability for me to say, hi, first name, this is Brightspace. Lots of little variables and things like that there that lets you drop those into content and personalize things and customize it for the context of the individual and who they are. As I'm orienting myself to Brightspace, I can see the courses that are available here. I can see some announcements, some social feeds, and then, ooh, some awards. I want those. This already is where the achiever and the explorer are looking at these thinking, I want that on my trophy case, and I want to know all of the different awards that are available to me. The fighter is starting to think about, I want to get more awards than anybody else. Look at what is available for me. And the socializer is thinking, I can't wait to show off all of the accomplishments that I've made here and to discuss with my friends which ones were my favorites, which ones were the hardest. So already there's a sense of interest, a sense of challenge and achievement to strive for here. When I drop into one of my courses, I'm presented with some additional information that again acknowledges this idea of progression and personalization. When I move into this science class, it's personalized. I can pick up where I left off. I don't have to hunt around. I can just drop right into the next topic. It shows me what I've completed. I don't need to go back to Unit 3 atoms. I've got a check mark on there and I've already completed it. I kind of get that little satisfaction when I see that check mark. And as an explorer, I can look around and see, well, what am I actually going to learn in Unit 1 here? Okay, I get a little bit of a description. Let me see what this is about. And then I can make my decision where I want to actually jump in and start doing some work. So very, very simple things that we can do right off the gate as we're crawling, as we're just getting into some of these ideas of how to bring in some of these elements of games that are relevant to orient me as a learner and to motivate me to continue to progress in my learning. Okay, let's switch gears and take a look at another different type of learning activity that we can design in a learning management system. So we can take what might normally be a dry text-based content, in this case, a quiz or a knowledge test, and I'm going to try to make it a little bit more engaging by presenting it as a quest and putting a narrative around that activity. It doesn't have to be an epic tale or anything like that. I don't have to recreate the Lord of the Rings here. But in this case, I'm going to take my students on a journey and they're in a boat and they're trying to move through some rough waters, some dangerous terrain. And each one of the questions in my quiz is going to be a different obstacle that they need to overcome to ultimately get to the finish line. So just that small little narrative to weave together the different elements of the quiz can do a lot to engage the learner and to create a sense of that connection to that narrative. So here I've got that little bit of an introduction in place. And when I go in and work with the questions in my quiz, just like in a game, I want everybody to succeed. I want them to master this material. So I ask the question, provide the question text, I provide answers, and there is a correct answer, but I give hints. I put some hints in place that the learner can choose to look at if they're not sure what they want to do when they answer this question. Next to the incorrect answers, I put information in place that helps them understand why they chose the wrong answer and what the right answer might look like. I'm trying to give them that scent so that they try again, they do better next time. And on their next life, maybe they'll master it and earn the award for this activity. So if we go and look at this from a student perspective, here when I go and take the quiz, I'm going to be presented with that introduction and that narrative that we saw before. So here's my game map and the different obstacles here. And I learned that I'm going to achieve a boating experience award if I do this well. And I'm presented with the questions. And so again, if I don't know the question, I can get a hint. And again, we're used to this sort of activity from when we're playing games. And I'm going to go through and I'm just going to quickly do this quiz here. And I could be looking at hints on each of these individual items. All of these different scenarios are connected back into the overall map that I laid out earlier. And then my last one. And when I submit this quiz, I'm going to get immediate feedback. So I see right out of the gate, I answered option 2 and option 4 was the correct feedback. And here's why. Here's that information that I placed in earlier. This could include links or videos that explain the concept right in place. The goal isn't to punish the student for doing poorly here. The goal is to try to get them to master this concept. And giving them that feedback and encouraging them to go back and try it again is very similar and very familiar to working with games as well. And I get that feedback on everything here. Here I got partial credit for this score. And when I complete that, I get another layer of information here that's useful to me. So those fighters might want to know, how did I do compared to the rest of the class? Well, I did slightly better. I got a 44 versus a 41. But I can share some of that information with my students and inform them and give them a bit of that payoff of how well am I doing next to my classmates and my peers. This type of design of the learning activity to think about a narrative and to try to support the student throughout isn't really about technology. It's more about creative design of the learning activity. And we find that's often the biggest barrier to creating really quality online learning experiences. Okay, switching gears again. So let's say I'm designing a course. In this case, I'm designing a communications course. I don't want everyone to have to do the same thing. I want students to be able to choose from a few options for how they demonstrate their knowledge of poetry in this example. And I want them to bring some of themselves into that. So I'm not going to necessarily dictate how they're going to show what they know, but I am going to evaluate whatever that is. So here I'm going to go and create a checklist in this case. So I'm going to go and say, grab a checklist. And just like any good cooking show, here's one I've previously prepared. And I've created a choose your own adventure checklist. And when I look at what's in that checklist, so here I've got the checklist open that I just created, or that I just rolled into my course. I basically just said, how do you want to show that you understand your poetry terms? Do you want to choose to analysis of poetry terms? Do you want to do an assignment? Or do you want to write your own poem and take a video of it in public? You're putting a little bit of choice in the hands of the student. Let them bring their own preferences, their own energy, their own creativity to demonstrating that they know this. Not everybody is going to test well. Not everybody does great at submitting assignments or organizing their speech. But in giving some choice or some agency for students, they're going to be that much more engaged. And potentially they might want to choose to take multiple paths there. That explorer might want to try to demonstrate their knowledge in a couple different ways. And as the educator, you can take the best one that demonstrates that they know what they're supposed to know. Okay, so when I've set up that checklist, as I'm in here designing my course, I'm going to have my students go through and look at poetry terms. They're going to look at some tips, and then they're going to get this checklist where they choose their own adventure. They get to pick what kind of assignment they want to take. And this is where some of those rules that I talked about earlier in my slides really come into play. So here, if they've picked option 1 in that checklist, I want them to do the poetry assignment. So I'm going to say this poetry assignment's not for everyone. I'm going to release it only to certain people. And so here I'm going to go and say, I only want this poetry assignment to be selected by people that have completed a specific checklist item. In my choose your own adventure, if you picked analysis of poetry terms, then you're going to see this poetry assignment. And I don't know if you saw it when I opened this, but these rules can be based on so many different things that are happening in the learning management system. This can be based on your groups that you might exist in, other courses that you're enrolled in can decide who gets to see this information, whether I've visited content or not done it, my scores, whether they're below a certain threshold, I might want to release this as remedial materials. This rules-based way of using information about the learner and their past behaviors and their past performance is a very, very powerful way to encapsulate some of these game elements into a course and to do it practically and to do it at scale. So here I'm just going to create the one condition. And this poetry assignment is now visible to any students that have picked that first item in the checklist. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on all of the other ones in these checklist items, the different paths that they may take based on choosing that checklist. And we can even take that a step further. We can make this even a little bit more bold as the instructor, and instead of giving the students knowledge of what choice they're making, we might even want to say, you know what? I'm just going to say this is choose door number 1, door number 2, and door number 3. And that way the students are actually choosing blindly. They don't know what they're going to pick. It's kind of a random choice. And they may want to choose to go back and ask themselves, what was behind door number 3 anyways? So you can have a little bit of fun with those things as you're designing these different paths. A really simple yet incredibly powerful way to give your students some choice and some agency into how they learn. And again, all 3 of these different activities that might be released based on what they chose in this checklist, they can all ladder up into the same grade item, the same scoring rubric or learning objective, depending on how you're doing assessments. Okay, continuing on. So the experience with games is also supposed to feel like progressing and leveling up. And as a teacher, this is part of what your job is. So here's where we can start to look at data that's happening in the learning management system. We can use that to benchmark engagement, and we can figure out how to help individuals or improve the design of the course. So, as I'm looking at all of the different students in my course, I might decide, discussions isn't the best data for me to look at here. I want to replace that, and I want to be looking at login activity, for example. And so as the educator, I can decide what's most important. Here I've got no logins. That was really useful. Really glad I did that. And I can hover over different students, and I can see if there's a trend. In this case, the students that are visiting the content a little bit more often, maybe we're seeing them fare better on the gradable items in the course. What's important here is that as the educator, I have some expertise and I have a sense of what types of behaviors are leading a student towards positive outcomes and engagement in the course. I have a sense of the types of behaviors that are risky, that are going to lead to a student to underperform or potentially to withdraw or disengage from a course. And so we've created another way to use this idea of rules that I showed before to create these things called agents. And basically they're rule-based ways of communicating with students. And this is how we can thread in some of the ideas that games bring in for reward scheduling. So looking at where are the natural areas of the course that I might want to look for an opportunity to course correct or remediate with a student. where I want to acknowledge progress that they've made, or where I want to challenge them to do something different. So in this case, I've got an agent that really recognizes that a student's in danger. So it's almost like a nudge that you get from apps that you haven't used in quite a while, where you say, well, I notice you haven't been in this course for the last 3 days, and I know that's problematic, and you haven't added anything to this discussion thread. So you're at risk. You're in danger of not being able to level up like the rest of the class. And so with those rules that I set up, I can create an automated email that goes right to the student, that uses their name, that captures them where they are once again. And here it just sets out the expectations. You're in danger of falling behind. By now you should have done the following. And what's really cool is I've got an additional link here to another gamified element in my course. If you're having any trouble, go to the group work area of the course, and the other students in the course that get the most upvotes in that discussions area are going to get another special badge. So now not only are we trying to support our students and create a community of helping them, we're gamifying that fact. We're trying to have those achievers and those fighters sort of personas think to themselves, I want to get the most upvotes. I want to help more of my classmates than anybody else. So you can start to get some virtuous cycles in how you bring in these gamified elements. And it doesn't have to be for punitive or for risk reasons. It can be to reward progress and to encourage more. Here we've got another rules-based communication or agent that looks at when a student's completed a specific module. This is a keystone activity in a certain module. And here I simply want to acknowledge that the students completed it, and woohoo, here's the dancing Pikachu to celebrate. And then let them know that there is a challenge quiz. There's a bonus they can do and an additional badge they can get on top of that if they do it. This seems really simple, just dropping and pasting an animated GIF into my communication. But this has such a big impact with students. I've seen this with my own children in their school that I've been setting up. My 8-year-old son finishes his math quizzes because the first one to finish gets their little Pokemon card, and they share it with their friends. We've seen really large introductory psychology courses have massive improvements to their student retention simply by using this rules-based approach to recognize achievement from a student, to show that somebody saw their progress, and to reward them with something as simple as a little digital picture like this. So this idea of reward scheduling is really powerful. Looking for well-designed times within a course to correct their behavior, to reward their progress, or to simply acknowledge their work and to encourage more of it. Okay. So I've talked a lot about badges and awards. And they're really a powerful tool that we can layer into the learning experience and recognizing achievement. We get to see things like friendly competition around who completes awards. We can see leaderboards to let those fighters get what they need. We can show what's available up front, as you can see here. And it even gives the criteria for completing each one of these awards that are in place. And there's a few different strategies for how to apply awards in a course. So one of the first ones that gets leveraged is called continuous awards. So providing an award every time a learner completes something. So for example, each time they compose of the first thread in discussions. It's the most predictable. It's kind of the least exciting award for learners to receive, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have a role in your plans for gamification. When you think about the last game that you played, you were probably not thrown right into the thick of things. You were given a walkthrough, a tutorial as the gameplay is kind of explained to you. These continuous awards, where you award their first post or their first content they viewed, sets the stage, lets them know that they're going to see this kind of recognition throughout the course. It's recommended to start with something that just says, hey, there is recognition happening here. You're going to get awards for things in this course. And then when continuous awards are figured out, then we have an idea of something called fixed ratio awards. And what that means is, as soon as your learners can predict when they're going to earn an award, you want to switch it up. You want it to be, you want to shift to turn some heads. So instead of every time they post the discussions, make it every 2 times, every 3 times. Give them that payoff to be unknown, a little bit intermittent. It starts to make things a little bit more scarce. It starts to make learners want to work a little harder for those awards. And then lastly, another type of award is variable. You can start to pepper your course with, for example, an award for viewing all the content in Module 4, or getting between 60 and 80 on a practice quiz, or posting 5 separate times on a single discussion. They're kind of oddly specific criteria that make the award kind of enticing. How do I go and get this? It's the kind of things that really light up explorers. You can use variable awards to target specific behaviors for learner engagement. Fancy way of saying, try to make it fun and to encourage the fun stuff. And the fixed ratio awards are better used for incremental things. Keep reading about, keep learning about this. And every few times you do that, I'm going to recognize you for that, or I'm going to award you for it. So when we look at how awards can be managed, here I can see the group of students in my class and who's got the most awards. I can see sort of that leaderboard right off the top. If Joe is one of those fighters, he's feeling really good about himself because he's got more awards than everybody else. And awards don't necessarily have to be granted based on activity that's happening in the online space. Maybe Irene and I had a really phenomenal conversation face-to-face. Maybe she gave an awesome oral presentation. Maybe I was looking at her Twitch stream and I saw her convey an idea in a really clear way. So I can issue her awards directly. In this case, maybe it's the first class communicator. And I can give that to her right there. So really flexible ways that you can use awards to acknowledge what an individual has done and some of the milestones that they've moved through. When we look at an award and how they're structured, again, it's using that same sort of rules-based approach that we had before. So just like when we were setting up the different options off that choose your own adventure and then checklist, the awards are determining what rules have to be met so that I can grant this award. Different types of awards we see getting used are participation. You did it. Did you show up to the class? Did you visit this content topic, for example? We see other types of awards being based on performance. So maybe that's a score on a quiz. So if you've scored greater than 80%, I'm going to give you this award. And those can be, you can do the gold star award is on 80%, and you can do the silver star on 60%. You can have different levels of performance for that award. Your award can be incremental. So, if you want to move someone from a level 1 ninja all the way up to a level 10 ninja, that might be done by visiting all the content topics in a specific area and completing a knowledge test at the end of it. But you can start to ladder those things together. And then finally, the last type of award that we see being used is meta awards. So this is an award for getting awards. So here I might say, you get this award after you've done the Customer Ninja. And maybe I want to do it after you've done the Customer Ninja and a great communicator. You're now a leading communicator. A meta award sort of encapsulates that you've done a whole bunch of additional tasks. So awards are really, really powerful way to leverage some of that rules-based approach. They're highly visual. They can be social. I can store those in my profile that I share with my other students and my other peers. I can put those in a backpack and take them offline if I want to. And they can encourage and motivate that type of progress and leveling up that are indicative of a lot of the games that we've talked about. So far, all the examples I've been going through are possible just by making some thoughtful design choices, not using any high-cost visuals or graphics. And gaming doesn't necessarily have to be a visual activity. But in our platform, we've gone above and beyond that and built out more advanced tools to build out games that are much more visual and a whole authoring environment for games. And so typically what we'd see this utilized for is you might have a typical online module like this introduction to leadership. And as I scroll through it, I've got a bunch of different types of content. It's really good content, but it's all very texty right here, a few assignments, quite linear, and it's just not the most alive and engaging looking way of presenting this. But using our game-based learning tool, I can organize that into a visual map. And so I can organize all those different leadership activities I saw before into this map. And there's an activity that I can move through, and I can visually see my progress, what's been completed, and how these things are related. I can change my avatar. Here you can see I've got my funky little avatar with the red shoes. I can change that to see fit how I want to. I can customize that. The socializer really wants to do that. When they show up in the leaderboard for this activity and they want to present themselves, creating this avatar is a really engaging process for them. Maybe not for others. And when I go in and work on the content that's in here, I get a little bit of a description of what I'm going to do as I move into that material. And then here I'm doing a piece of content on motivating employees. And again, it's very visual. So I'm looking at the different ways I can motivate employees, and I'm doing that spatially. I'm clicking on this person. I can motivate them by having knowledge of their results. Great. I can do it by competition. So a lot of the same information could be displayed in text, but a little bit more memorable, a little bit more interactive when done this way. Similarly, in our game-based learning area here, I've got an inline quiz here. So here again, when I'm doing a knowledge check, I want the learner to master this. I want to give them immediate feedback. What are some of the effective ways to motivate my team? Well, I just went through some of that. Recognition, collaboration, and fear maybe? No, not fear. Okay. So immediate feedback on that. Very visual. And as I'm moving through and completing these activities, again, I see what's completed and what's not. I can see where there's an award available here. So when I do how to respond to leadership approaches, I'm going to get an award. It's going to show up on my leaderboards for that as well. So I really want to do well on this. And again, an interactive activity. I'm going to deal with, and I can see how I'm doing. Green, great. Okay, yellow, kind of not the best. Red, immediate feedback, more interactive, and this mini game inside that visual sort of map, again, can be a really engaging way to display content. So this is a relatively new tool for us. We're really excited. Singapore Management University is actually starting to use this this summer, as well as for their staff training course. What's great about that is there's not a whole development team needed to build a nice game map and all of the different dynamics that we saw here. It's the same kind of editing environment that's happening through my browser that I've done for everything else. So, here's where I can set up my game map. I can create the different tiles on it. I can add the different learning activities that I want to create here. If I want to create another one off of here, I can split that off and create new branches, associate awards with that, have a really powerful authoring tool to manage these things. So that's more of the run. I was talking about the crawl, walk, run ways of bringing gaming and gaming elements into a course. The run here is a little bit of work up front, but a very impactful and engaging experience for learners when it's delivered. And just looking at time, I do want to get to questions. The last thing I wanted to talk about really briefly is just data. We need to benchmark the learning engagement that's happening through all of these different activities we've created. We have to make sure that data is informing future designs and improvements to the experience. On top of this, and I really want to stress this, and I should have throughout the presentation, we also need to be listening to students and to talking to students themselves. It's critical to make sure we're understanding the actual usage and outcomes data that's coming out, but also what the students are telling us. What works for them? What was confusing? Where do they need more instruction, more choice? Where were they overwhelmed or bored? And use that information to continuously improve the design of the course. So here, when we've got really good access to data, we might be looking at, well, how well are the awards actually being issued, and are students moving through and achieving the way that I want them to? We can use data and all of the insights that come from that when it's tracked in the LMS. Am I seeing more traffic and more utilization of my learning programs when I start to gamify things this way? And I don't want to watch this all the time. I want to use some of those same rules that say, hey, if the login count, if the utilization of my online learning is getting better by, let's say, 15% or getting worse, I want to know about that. That tells me that I've either done something really well that I want to understand and do more of, or I've done something that's made things worse for my student experience, and I really need to get on top of that and remediate my course design. So data there is really important in making sure that this whole process of how to inform the instructional design and the student experience takes advantage of real world data that's happening and real world feedback from your students as well. Whew, okay, I'm gonna stop there. There's so much more that I can go into and detail in terms of how we really embrace game mechanics and course design. I hope you got a small flavor for the types of experiences that are possible using a modern learning platform. And as I just bring up, there's some great questions in here too. Thanks everybody for taking that time and for voting on them. So first question is there a template for gamifying a lesson that we can follow to quickly get started? That's actually a really good suggestion, Kamal. On the Brightspace community, we have a number of different resources that talk about and to provide some structure for how do you gamify a specific learning activity and to think about it for a course in general. I believe some of those resources we're gonna drop into the chat and make available here. We're constantly looking for new ways to do that. One of the challenges of creating a template for gamifying a lesson is it can be so diverse for different subject areas on how to do it. It's tough to be overly prescriptive, but that's something that we'll look to do in the future too. Prabhu asks, are there ready-to-use graphics available on Brightspace when designing the learning games? So yes, to an extent. So that game-based learning, that visual editor that I showed at the end there, that has a whole bunch of graphics available, and you can just basically select those in the authoring tool and use them. But outside of that, everywhere that we moved around in Brightspace, whether I was adding feedback for a student, creating content, making instructions for an assignment, all of those places would let me do a quick search for web graphics that are under Creative Commons. So we have a built-in search within Brightspace that lets you look for images and media resources that are free to use and available for educational use. Really good question here is, I'll read the whole thing. Gamification makes learning fun and interactive, but there's a tendency for students not to recognize anymore and put a premium on their learning because all they want to do is win the game. So can you provide some tips on where to set the limitation or boundary in terms of gamification of learning? It's a phenomenal question, and it's one that we get a lot. I think one of the keys is to look at the gaming elements that you're bringing into a course need to reinforce and lead to the learning outcomes and the learning experiences that your whole course design is driving to. So if completing the game isn't analogous to demonstrating that learning objective or being successful in the course, you might have a bit of you might have to recalibrate what your game mechanics and rewards are based on so that those two objectives are much more aligned. A question I've never seen before, actually. Does this come with sounds while they play the quiz games? No, it's possible to add sounds into these. As I was designing that quiz, for example, I could have put a link in to play a sound, but typically, no, we don't see a lot of sounds and auditory cues being added into the learning experiences that we're creating. It's actually a question now I'll ask other educators now that you've asked that. Really good question. How do silly awards like "I turned in my homework" not insult adult learners who are at the top of their game professionally? You got to build the more appropriate reward mechanisms for the right audiences. So when I talked about know your learners, yeah, if you're dealing with professionals that are that are going through, that are very time strapped, that's probably not the appropriate type of award for them. You might want to have an award that's that's rewarding them for helping another individual, or sharing a top idea that others appreciated. Not "I turned in my homework." So really, it's about design. It's about bringing the right motivation, the right reward schedule for your course and your course design goals, and for your audience and the types of learners that you're working with. Sometimes that means even asking the students up front to self-identify. How would you like this course to be presented? And once they've made that choice, they may want to get chatty awards for everything that happens where somebody else might not want to. We can use those rules-based ways to manage that. Jackie asks, can I pull reports on how individuals went in a quiz session, as well as how often a session has been accessed, or how often a quiz question was answered correctly? Absolutely. We also provide statistics on things like reliability coefficients. So we know, is our detractors being selected more often than the correct answer? So lots of statistics are layered in, both visually to show, a histogram of performance on a question. There's logs of all of the different activity that happens within a quiz. Even for integrity of a quiz, we know the IP address that it's coming from, in case somebody is multiple people are trying to take a quiz from different machines. A really great question. Wow, you guys are awesome. Do you think gamification will work in a B2B virtual event? If yes, do you think the concept that Brightspace has will effectively attract B2B customers? Melissa, I hope so. We're actually betting on this. Like every other company out there that had a physical event planned, like a users conference, ours has moved to a virtual event as well. And we're doing a lot of gamification to try to build engagement with our users through our users conference. We do a lot of work with corporate learning organizations as well. And some of our biggest corporate customers are professional associations. And so they're using Brightspace for a lot of their virtual events as well. And they're doing leaderboards for points that are acquired from scavenger hunts, from visiting and interacting with different partners. So we really think well-designed gamified elements are appropriate for a virtual event. Absolutely. Question was, we usually have online quiz in our LMS. Can we deem those online quiz as part of gamification? I think that's an important question because it's really all about how you design the quiz, the creative elements that you bring to it. In my mind, and in working with the educators that I've talked to, what makes it gamified is the narrative that you put around it. If there's a sense of imagination or dropping into a different scene or scenario and working through that starts to fire some of the same neurons that are happening when you're working with a game. On completion of it, if you're rewarding their achievement, they're recognized for meeting a certain threshold, that sort of lends towards it being more gamified. If it's just do a knowledge test on some math facts and you get a score at the end, not necessarily so much as something I would call a gamified element. I'm going to take one more question here before we are out of time. So last one I'm going to look at here is gamification is making learning simple. Learner may become habitual to this and may never let this real thinking ability to groom. Do I see any danger in this? I do see danger in that. And I think that's a really good point. We want to explain while we're taking the learner through the process of the game, what they're going to get out of that, why we're doing it. Creating really well-defined instructions for, you're doing this activity because my expectations are that you will learn X and that you will demonstrate Y, helps the learner understand the process, the scaffolding that you've created for that learning that just happens to be wrapped in a format that's a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting in terms of a game. That said, you know, teaching learners how to learn and how to be critical thinkers is important, and not everything really belongs as a game or is appropriate. High stakes assessments and evaluations are things that should be treated as formal activities and shouldn't necessarily be underscored that way. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. I know I went a minute over. I really appreciate the level of engagement and the great questions. Look out for the recording of this session in your email, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on future webinars. I'll be on another one in a couple of weeks.